Peter Horsey and Bella Erskine in the hybrid pickup didn't puncture, but were forced off the pace with springs that were too soft for the terrain and were down in 7th by the end of stage 2.
Our springs were too soft, and for sure, like on the rocky stuff, it was a big problem and we lost a lot of time. But we know we're putting the harder springs on now, and we're changing a few things with the suspension to see if we can come up with something better.
With harder suspension fitted, they were back in the race, but it was short-lived when the onboard computer's crank sensor stopped working and they lost all drive, ending their rally in the hills. Few cars got through stage 1 without puncturing, and for Raji Barij and Jeff Mays, it was double punishment when they punctured twice. It took 9 minutes to change the 2 wheels, during which they lost 3 places on the road. All hope of a top placing went by the board, but their rally was far from over as they set about recovering the time lost. A crew that were clearly challenging the leaders were Sandeep Jandu and Gurdeep Mehangra, but their times never got recorded when they didn't even make it to the end of stage 1.
5 kilometers to the finish, the tire burst, the rim shattered, caliper went somewhere else, brake disc shattered, we couldn't continue. So
Tejveer Rai and George Mwangi's performance behind the wheel of the new N16 was eagerly watched, and they didn't disappoint. Having done little testing, they were learning the car on the move, and lying 9th early on was a good start.
It's a left-hand drive, so getting used to that, and a new dog box as well, so having a few problems with the gearing and stuff, but just going to take this one just to learn the car a bit now.
They still had plenty in reserve when suddenly the oil drained out of the gearbox, and their only way home was on the end of a tow rope. Fard Barry and Ben Spinks surprised the pundits on stage 1 by claiming the 5th fastest time. This was proof of how far they have come since taking up the sport exactly 2 years ago. But all the effort was lost when they put the fan through the radiator after crossing a river too quickly. With Baldev Chaga and Tejveer Rai out, the Subaru honours were now in the hands of Onkar Rai and Raju Chaga. On stage 1, they hit a ditch hard, bending the front end, and were lucky to get away with no damage. They were in 5th, but 3 minutes separated them from the closest Mitsubishi ahead.
So we just messed up the front of the car a bit. And then we had to back off after that. So, I mean, we were doing well up until that point. So we've got no punches, nothing. But lucky to get at that stage.
In 6th was another Subaru in the hands of Anwar Pandya and Ken Masoni, who were more than pleased that the N10 was performing so well on such a tough event. They were in a time bubble and only had to maintain their pace to gain what was a much-needed finish. After 100 kilometers of competitive motoring, the race for the win was clearly between Alistair Kavanagh and Carl Tundo, who were separated by 10 seconds. Their closest rival was nearly 4 minutes back, with the times well spread behind. The cars were now in section 4, which began with a narrow track, hugging the hillside, which called for total concentration and accuracy. But once down on the valley floor, the road became open and extremely quick. It continued to be a head-to-head race between Tundo and Kavanagh, and despite being teammates, behind the wheel they were desperately competitive. It was all about finding the quickest line, and Alistair Kavanagh and Gavin Lawrence dropped 18 seconds to Tundo, swapping places on the leaderboard, and were now in second, 8 seconds behind. Carl Tundo and Tim Jessup were only too aware that Kavanagh was on the limit and were not going to let him get away. Their only strategy was to be fully committed, judge the braking distances, and be tidy, and won the stage by a big enough margin to take over the lead. Azza Anwar and Julius Giga were also driving at max, but on average were 10 kph slower than the two ahead, which was enough to drop them back by 2 minutes, but had enough time in hand to stay in third. Hardip Rissi and Ravi Soni had the misfortune to puncture for the third time, and following a slow change, they dropped from 4th to 11th.
So you have to be extremely careful, keep on the tracks. And I didn't manage to do that, it seems, because I had 3 punctures on the stages. So I had to change them in the stage. In this heat, it's not fun. By the time you get to the third one, you almost want to leave the car behind.
There was no chance of making up the time lost over the remaining 2 sections, but did recover 1 place to eventually finish 10th. With Ressi dropping back, Onkar Rai and Raju Chaga took over 4th place, and with 5 minutes separating them from the car ahead, they would need fate to intervene to climb any higher. Having one of the best drives of their rallying career were Anwar Pandya and Ken Masoni, who were comfortably in 5th, taking full advantage of the N10, which was on peak form. But it didn't last when on the final stage, the car overheated and they dropped a chunk of time cooling it down, losing 8 places to finish 13th. Running in 6th were Ben Mushemi and Evans Mwenda, giving the Evo 6 its 2nd outing of the year. They were having a clean run, but with the time so close, could not fend off those applying pressure from behind, dropping 2 places to eventually finish an impressive 8th overall. The route clearly suited the GT4 of Jaswinder and Ravi Chana, who took full advantage, leading the pack of Group S cars. They are always strong contenders, and considering the quality of the entry, 7th was impressive. Ravi Chana in the navigator's seat was testing a new application called iCo Driver, reading the notes from an iPad, the future way to navigate and dispense with all the paperwork.
One, you get away from paper and you can make a lot more changes. It's more cost effective in the sense that if the organizers do electronic notes, they can email them to everybody, so the printing costs are not there. And your full itinerary comes onto the whole thing, and it's GPS enabled.